Hello and welcome to the LUKR Club YouTube channel. My name is Luke and I am your host for this brand new podcast style series where I interview members of the LUKR LEGO Train Club. Joining me for the first episode of the series is member Jon. Hello Jon.
Hello everyone.
How are you doing?
Okay, thanks. Yes, in the middle of building things and thinking about building more things, as you can imagine.
So we are going to go straight into the first question. So Jon, what is it that got you into building LEGO trains to begin with?
Well, I suppose it must be because I was a Lego fan or as a child from a very early age. I didn't have Duplo. It was around, I believe, when I was a kid, but I didn't have it. And I think I started with the standard system bricks. And one of my earliest Christmas presents that I can remember, and I think this was 1970, I received from Santa a Lego 120 train. And I was kind of train mad anyway. And I needed my father's help to build it, I recall. But once we got going, I never looked back. I had the blue track, battery power. I ended up changing it, custom building bits for it, and as I got older managed to add some bits and pieces.
So those early train sets you said you got, do you still have them in your collection by chance?
As it happens, I do. I do have the 120 built, which I built about over 20 years ago, just to sort of as a keepsake and shoved it in a box. That's nice for my one of my legacy models that's actually been running now. Let me think about it. It's 53 years old now, and it still works. It's a great testament to the forwards compatibility of the Lego train system. And I've also got some models or sets or parts of sets from that time, because one of my friends from school was seriously into Lego trains as well, and we used to set up very complex London Underground layouts in the whole upstairs of the house where I lived at the time, and that was great fun. And he ended up giving me his Lego some years later, so I've kind of collected by default quite a lot of track and motors and bits and pieces from the 4.5 volt era. Which, you know, it's good to see it still runs and still works if you want it to on the current system.
That's a really cool thing to hear. Yeah, it's really interesting for me to look back, or I suppose in this case, listen back to some older fans of the hobby and talk about some of the really early train sets that came along, because it's so different to what it is today compared to back then.
Yeah, I think the other there's several aspects to that, I might add. One, of course, the obvious thing is the Lego system, especially for the trains, wasn't as developed. It started to become more developed in the 70s, and obviously then you had the 12-volt system arrive and things really took off. But the elements, the range of elements that we got today is something I could only dream of as a kid, and colours as well. One of the things that I think from back then is trying to make everything motorized as a kid was very expensive, because obviously you've only got pocket money to play with and hopefully birthday presents, Christmas presents, that kind of thing. So we ended up mainly using push-along trains, which worked because at that age you just thought it was just part of the fun. And it was fun. I do remember building my first, if you like, scale prototype Lego model was Class 35 High-Mech. I had the Hornby model when I was about 9 with blue and yellow, and it's quite exciting 00 gauge model. And I decided to have a go at making one in Lego. So this was probably late 70s, and I motorized that with the 4.5 volt blue battery box and blue motor to kind of look like British Rail blue at the time, and obviously yellow cab fronts. So even with the parts that were available back in the 70s, you could, with some imagination, still make prototype models.
That would be an incredible thing to see, using some of the older, more basic shaped bricks to make a model that a lot of people could still try and attempt today. That sounds really cool to try and just picture and visualize.
it wasn't as good as most of the models you see today, believe me.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
One of the other models that we built tube trains using 6 wide basic structure, like the traditional Lego train size. And then we realised that though they were the tube trains, but we needed, just for the overseas listeners, the London Underground has 2, if you like, loading gauges, has the smaller trains, which run in deep tube, and the surface stock, which is almost the same size as a regular UK train, so it's larger and needs bigger tunnels. So when we realised, even big sort of train fans as kids, we realised that we had to have a difference in the size of the train. So not only was it taller, but we actually made 7 wide trains in the 70s.
So, of all the models that you have built, what would you say is the standout model of your collection?
I've thought about this, and I think that it's obvious that the one I would call standout collection is the one that everyone else has built as well, but it is my own version. It's a Class 08 shunter, as better known as a Gronk to most of us. I particularly like mine because it's been built with automatic built-in uncoupling system, which is remotely controlled from the handset. Now, I originally built a version of this as a 9-volt version back in 2005, and that model was 6 wide, but it also included a Technic motor, a polarity switch, and a battery box on board as well, so that could actually remotely uncouple using a slightly cruder system. I wanted to rebuild it 7 wide, and I wanted to include the power up system because you've got the Bluetooth functionality then for remote uncoupling. It's something that I want to try and do on more Lego models. So I'd say that's my favourite, and one of the other reasons it's my favourite is I've actually rebuilt it in the last year to make it more robust, make it look better, and to gear it down to a more realistic speed. So I'm hoping I've got the best of all worlds with that model.
So with your Gronk model, I remember seeing a couple of pictures of it where you had the wasp stripes on the back of the cab, but it's not a clean diagonal stripe design. It's a bit like a diagonal blocky sort of look, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I've got a slightly different take on how to finish models to compare to the way most people are going these days with decals and lining tape. I totally understand why you want to make it look, or people want to make those models look more like, should we say, the real thing, or more like a model of an engine. But I see the appeal of Lego slightly differently to that, and I like traditional brick built livery. And brick built wasp stripes are very difficult, so they are a bit blocky, but they are wasp stripes nonetheless.
It's quite interesting to look at those kind of models because it's an interesting snapshot, so to say, of how things were built, even just about a decade ago, compared to all the decals and lining tape, like you said, that we've got today. But it's also really cool to see that people still prefer to have brick-built details. Another club member, Andrew, for example, he doesn't really want to use decals, or at least he's not fond of them, and will always prefer to go for brick-built details and lining. So yeah, it's definitely really cool to see that kind of method is still very strong in the hobby.
Okay, with regards to the lining question, I think it's kind of boxed in the same place as using non-Lego parts and perhaps modified Lego parts, where some of us like to try and keep it Lego pure, as it were, although that's getting harder these days when your personal build standards demand something that isn't available. And I also think that there's a line where you might as well go to traditional model railways if that's as far as you want to go with it. I have seen some fantastic Lego models that aren't really Lego, and I suppose I could go back a few years. There's a brilliant builder, Carl Graytix, and I'm not sure if he's still
Carl
in.
Graytrix, yeah, he came back recently, which is quite exciting.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And I remember seeing his models at one of the Steam shows, and I was transfixed. I thought it was fantastic. But the closer I looked, the more I realised it was not Lego as such. It was Lego, but it wasn't very pure. And it's great because it looks fantastic, and that's his way. And I'm not going to be one to sort of say that I'm Lego pure, because I have some Trix Bricks ballast plates, and I've got some FX track, which is obviously not Lego. I just feel that if you go to those lengths, you might as well get into O-gauge model railways, which I actually have some of as well. So I suppose that helps me keep away from the non-Lego modelling side.
So having mentioned building in such a purist way, the next question for you is, a lot of LEGO train mocks nowadays aren't 100% purist, especially within members of the club, for example, with the custom wheels and rods, etc. So what custom parts or power systems or methods, like the use of lining tape, and again, like you said, different tracks, have you adopted for your layout and models?
It's limited at the moment. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just the track, which will be FX tracks, 9 volt, of course, in my case. But for example, the model we spoke of earlier, my Class 08 shunter, is 100% Lego. And that's part of the appeal of the model to me, is that I haven't had to diverse into the dark side to use non-Lego elements. In fact, I'm looking at some of my collection at the moment. I think it's pretty much all 100% Lego, and unmodified Lego at that.
That's pretty good. I think it's cool to see that there are some people that kind of stick to the purist methods nowadays. It's a slow, well, at least in my mind, it's a kind of slow, gradual process into accepting of the use of non-purist methods. Again, well, track is a very easy thing to accept because the track that LEGO make is very singular, so to say. But things like power systems and different methods like the use of lining tape, I reckon one day more and more people will kind of widely adopt and accept. But it's also at the same time really cool to see people just maybe not flat out refuse them, but it's just, that's not their style, so they're never going to bother with it.
Well, I've just realised I have bothered with it on my Mallard, with the larger wheels and the connecting rods, which it's kind of, we're pushed into a corner with that because there isn't a Lego alternative, which is an argument that you could use on many parts, on a steam loco especially. So I think there's an argument for dabbling, but only when you need to, if you like.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And like you said, with steam locomotives, it's very much something that you have to go out of your way to get these third-party rods and third-party wheels, because what LEGO themselves offer is nowhere near enough. Again, only one wheel size, it comes in 2 different colors, and that's it. You can only make a couple of models with that, but if you want to make your Mallard, for example, again, you need different wheels, you need different colors, and you've, again, kind of backed into a corner where you're kind of forced to expand at that point.
Yes, I mean, I could look at making the Mallard with the Lego wheels and using a Technic connecting rod of some sort. I just think I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to look like a Mallard more than a small-wheeled A4 copy, if you like.
So have you ever taken your models to display at a LEGO show before? And if you have, what was your best or favourite show experience as a displayer?
Yes, I have displayed my models, but not for a long time. It was a long time ago, and I think where I came out of my first dark age, it was around the time the internet started to become available widely. And it was a time when I discovered there were other adults out there who still liked Lego or still built with Lego. So at that point, it was possible to connect up with others in a way that was unseen of before. And where I lived in Cheshire, I joined up with a guy called Tony Priestman. I think he's probably not in the hobby anymore. And we set up a Lego train club. And we started to do small displays at schools, that kind of thing. It was the North British Lego Train Club. We also brought our models to one of the Lego model shows organised in Southport. And this was all pre-British Association. Eventually, we ended up displaying at Steam as the North British Lego Train Club. And that eventually turned into a kind of catalyst that ended up becoming the British Association when more people got involved. So and then British started running the steam shows. So yes, I have, and I think in terms of all the shows have been fun. I'm going through a period where I haven't really got as much time for shows this year, but maybe next year's different. But in terms of what was the favourite experience, I have to refer back to one of the steam shows where I think we were getting towards the end of the day. And if I kind of just give you the picture of what we had there, we had quite a long layout built with several members, sets of modules. They all very compatible, all the tracks lined up. So everyone built their modules, put them on their own built tables, bolted them together, and we had a big layout, perhaps, I don't know, 15 meters long, something like that. And it was all 9-volt with the metal track. So we had a great running session. I think it was getting towards the end of the day when fewer trains were running. And I had this model of a Southern Region motor luggage van. For those of you who don't know about those prototypes, they were actually built to run on electrified rails, and they also had a built-in battery that allowed them to run on short sections of track that weren't electrified. So what I did with this model, I decided to build it like the prototype, and actually had a 9-volt battery built in that was hot wired to reduce it to 3, or the battery box was hot wired to reduce it to about 3 volts. So it would crawl along if I moved a switch on it. But what it would also do is feed power back into the track as it was doing so. So it was quite interesting to put this on the track, switch it into battery mode, and watch all of these trains on the same layout start creeping around. And people didn't know what was going on at the time. It was most amusing.
That actually sounds incredible. That is something I would love to see nowadays, like the whole shebang as well, not just that particular model where it feeds power back into the track. It's like a bit of a wizardry thing going on there. You just press the switch on one model and all of a sudden everything else is turning. But the fact that there was a time where such a massive layout existed with all this 9-volt track, it's something that I don't think you would ever really see today unless a couple of people who have hoarded all of the 9-volt track kind of come together and make such a layout. But man, that must have been one hell of a snapshot of the past.
There are photos of it, obviously, somewhere. I'll need to look them up. But what was interesting, I think it's changed a little bit, because back in those days, the default was for everyone to work on one big layout. And we used to have planning meetings to say, right, you build that bit, I'll do the bit at the end, I'll do a loop, with a fairground in it at the other end, and someone will build a station and a bridge, and it'll all be worked out so that you had this massive layout, very long usually rather than deep. Yeah, some of those layouts tend to be smaller, but more of them, if you like. So I think they're built either by individuals or small groups working on one layout, rather than building their individual sections and then bringing them and joining them together. So there is a change in how neither one's worse than the other. It's just a case of what worked back then and what everyone wanted to do.
That's pretty cool, yeah. And it definitely seems similar to how I suppose some clubs would operate today. It's interesting how it's very similar in operation back then as it still is today, because there are members in the LUKR who run joint club layouts. And again, there's these meetings where they have these calls and they say, okay, you build this section and you can go into this bit here and so on. It's interesting for me because I've been in the hobby for a number of years, but within the club, I've only been as a member of LUKR for about 2 years or so at this point. So it's interesting to get this, well, I suppose insider information is one way of putting it, but it's so cool to think, oh my God, it's the same as it was back then. It's really simple, but it's so exciting at the same time.
Yes, and I think if you look at traditional model railways, it's very rare that a modular approach works well, because everything's kind of a bit more, shall we say, analog in terms of the way it looks. But when we can line studs up to studs, and they're always going to be in the same position, it's possible and much easier to have a modular layout built that way, whether it's by several people who live in different parts of the country bringing their sections together, or whether it's people who work together closely, it doesn't really matter. The whole system approach by Lego allows you to basically assemble a layout just like Lego bricks.
So given how long you have been in the Lego train hobby, I am very keen to ask you this next question. What is the best Lego train set that you own or have owned? And was there a Lego train set that you never got, but you wished you did get?
The second question is an easy answer. It's almost everything that I didn't get is what I wished I did get. But the first one, I would say there's one model Lego made in 1991 that was, in my view, the most realistic train model they've ever made, and also was suitable and looked absolutely at home on a British outline layout. And that model is a blue hopper car, item 4536.
Yes, I think I've actually got a few of them.
If you've got a few, you're very lucky. They're kind of very expensive at the moment, secondhand. Now, this will shock you. A long time ago, just at the point where the Lego clubs were starting to join up in the UK on the internet, there was a shop in Manchester called Busy Bee. And a guy there was quite a Lego enthusiast in terms of the shopkeeper was. And he would buy in stock, old Lego stock from Germany. And he was selling these hopper cars, blue hopper cars. I remember now, I think it was £7 each. And to buy one now on eBay brand new is probably over £100. And I think I snapped up about 2 or 3 of them at the time, not thinking that we'd ever get to a situation where they'd be so valuable. But of course, I wanted to build them. I just saw it as a really clean, finished model. Few studs showing. I don't mind studs, but it was just the fact that it looked like a hopper car. It had smooth lines. It had an actual operating trapdoor underneath the model as well. So for me, that was their best, or the best one I've had from Lego.
That is so cool, because the ones I said I have, I think are technically rebuilds in a way. I haven't actually looked at these in a while, but I remember going to a Lego auction and there was one of the lots that had a bunch of Lego train related models, and amongst them were 3 of these hoppers. Now, again, when you look at the model, I'll have to probably dig them out and double check, but it doesn't look like it's the model, if it makes sense. It looks like someone's been able to like reverse engineer the model and make it with all the parts that he's had to hand. In a way, like, again, it's difficult to kind of make it make sense. It looks and feels like that set, but if you look a little bit closer and spend a bit more time kind of analyzing the model, you think, it feels like these bricks are a bit newer than they probably should be. Maybe there's a sticker or 2 missing. I've got 3 of the, at least to me, I've got 3 of those hoppers, which is very cool. And it's also, like you said a moment ago, where you bought 3 at the time, not knowing, or 2 or 3 at the time, not knowing that they would become crazy expensive today. It's a real shame that this is going to be a very interesting thing to say in of itself. But nowadays, with pretty much everything, Lego especially, everything is being held to such a set value. So you know that when a set comes out, down the line, there's going to be so many of these that haven't been sold, and all of a sudden it's going to be rare and collectible, have value. There was no way was that the thought all those years ago. You saw a small hopper car for like £7. Okay, that's a cool, fun thing to have. Nobody would have had the foresight back then to think today, okay, that's something that a lot of people would potentially be willing to spend a lot of money on. So I am really, really envious of the people back then, like you, for example, who were able to get these old sets for basically pocket, well, I don't know if pocket money would be the right word, but, they were able to get them for a very, very good price.
Yes, and even that was obviously a discount sort of situation where we was offloading stock. But even Lego themselves, when I think back, there was a rerun of the Metroliner set in one of the Legends boxes. It's probably about 20 years ago, maybe even more. But it was in a grey box. It didn't have everything that the original Metroliner set came with. Perhaps the controller was missing or something like that. But everything else was there, and it was ridiculously cheap. I think I bought it at one of the Lego. It might have been at the Lego stores or online even at the time, and I think it was about 60 quid or something like that. It was ridiculous.
This is like rubbing salt into the wound. It's like on discount, you got it for only 60s. Like, I remember buying a Metroliner for the first time at the same place that did these Lego auctions, these specialized Lego auctions, and I bought about 5 Metroliner sets over time. And the first, I don't remember how much I paid for each one, but I remember the first one at this auction, I paid 165 for it, and I was really battling for it as well. So that it was its own thing, but back then you just buy a Metroliner set for 60 quid and it was brand new. And this is, again, it's one thing to kind of feel, I miss this time where you could just do that. But listening back to these stories, that's just the coolest thing ever.
Yes, and we had to pounce because what Lego tended to do then, I think, was oversupply, which they don't seem to be doing as much now, or they're controlling the market more. Because those Metroliner sets were up for closer to £100 for a long time, and then suddenly they dropped to £60 or £65 or something, and I'm sure that was bought from Lego Direct. So I haven't seen that kind of discounting for years. I'm coming back to the question on was there a Lego train set that you never got but wished you did get? I think the one I would go for, it would be a 9-volt set, but they did a 9-volt hobby set which had a motor and loads of different kind of combinations of parts you could make and instructions to make various different models.
Oh, is this the Crocodile 30-in-1?
That's yes, it was. There was a crocodile on it. Yes, that's right. I think that was the front kind of model, if you like, the on the front of the box.
I've got that set, and I remember buying it on Bricklink for, at the time, this was a couple of years ago as well, where at the time where I saw it on Bricklink, I thought, you know what, this is the cheapest one I've seen anywhere. It's probably going to become more expensive if I leave it alone, so I went ahead and went for it. And I think that was the set that I had the most play value in, because it was a 30-in-1, and I went through a process of building and documenting all 30 models. And it was, I did this over the span of about 2 months, and it was a slog. I mean, good Lord. I mean, don't do what I did and build all 30 models back to back, but it's definitely, or at least potentially, one of, if not the best set ever, just for the parts. It was incredible. But again, the 30-in-1 nature of it, like the Creator Series that Lego does, where it's a 3-in-1 thing, but the fact that this was a 30-in-1 was just incredible. You had to find the instructions for the other models online, but I think, again, when I got mine, it was early 2018 or so, and I think that was the last decent time to get one because of how much I don't remember the exact number I paid for the set, but I know that it was the best one around. And if you were to try and find one nowadays, it would be much more difficult to find one, let alone find one at a good price.
Yes. I think I've been pounced at the last minute and lost out on eBay auctions several times. I think there's a lot of interest. I don't know if eBay's the best place to buy these sets, but once or twice you can get lucky. It's just not very often these days because there seems to be so much interest, especially if it's complete and in very good condition.
So now my final question for you is, what is the best tip you can give someone who is getting into the Lego train hobby?
Now this is a good question, but I think there are several answers, and it will depend on your budget. If I was going to look at the Lego train hobby the way I do, having been in it for some time, and money was no object, I'd say buy as many 9-volt sets as you can and use metal track, because ultimately you have something that will be forwards and backwards compatible with whichever other powered system you use if you're going to expand your hobby into greatness. However, most of us are not in that lucky position. And I think what I would suggest is look not necessarily at the current Lego train sets, but the ones that have just been discontinued, which is the 60197 and these, I think it's 60198, and I've actually got 2 copies of each of those. I've got a couple that I haven't built yet, and I basically bought them for parts more than anything else, and the PU powered up system. But the idea of those sets is, because they're not the current sets, it may be possible that they're going to be discounted. And if you can get the passenger train, which is the 60197, for around £80 or less, that's usually a good price. And I think probably about 110 or less for the goods train is a good price as well. Those 2 sets would mean at a reasonable price, you can get quite a lot of models to start with, a couple of engines already there and motors, wheels, that kind of thing. Moving on from that, it's probably a case of joining a Lego train club and getting inspiration, and or maybe going online and having a look at what people can do, because it's very easy to get kind of stuck in the this is what Lego make, so I've got to use it kind of ethos. Whereas really the beauty of the Lego train hobby, is that you can do MOCs or mocks, as we call them, and build what you like. And if it doesn't work, you take it apart and build something else. But I would suggest for people really getting into it to try and explore mocks as much as you can and just have a go.
Yeah, that's definitely some really good advice. And I think it was an interesting answer from you as well, because you've been in the hobby for a very long time, having experience with some of the older sets, seeing the evolution of the Lego train hobby.
Yes, I've actually had 2 Dark Ages. I'm that old.
What do you mean by a dark age, though? Because you've said this a couple of times. What is it you mean by that?
Oh, right. Oh, this is a term that was commonly used a few years ago by Lego enthusiasts or AFOLs for, obviously, we play with Lego as kids, and then we discover other things in life as we get older, maybe different types of hobbies, girls, boys maybe. And then you kind of lose interest a little bit in Lego, and you might then consider it's not really for me because it's a kid's toy. And then you start sort of moving away from the hobby, thinking it's not for you. And that's considered a dark age for the time it takes for you to come back and realise how wrong you were. And you had to start again with the Lego hobby. It happened to me, and I kind of got into it again after my first Dark Age, which my Dark Age didn't really, it was more of a grey age, because I still like the Technic sets and things like that. But my first Dark Age finished, and I think when my kids were very little, I had excuses to go and buy Lego again. And then that just opened the floodgates. And I had a second Dark Ages when... I think when I kind of retracted from the hobby, because I felt that shortly after Lego introduced or discontinued the 9-volt range, and it looked like they were moving away from dedicated trains, I kind of moved back to model railways again for a bit, and only came out of that dark age perhaps 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, okay then. So this is your sort of third stint then with the Lego, well, I suppose not just Lego trains, but Lego as a whole then.
Yes, that's right, yeah. And I might have another one at some point. There's no limit to the number of dark ages you're allowed, I'm sure.
Well, here's to hoping that there won't be any more dark ages, because I think in this current modern day, there is so much going on in the hobby to keep your interest somewhere, because there's loads of people that still love 9-volt, FX Bricks who are doing the custom 9-volt compatible track, and of course their new motors. There's all the people working with decals, etc. There's so much to keep you in the hobby with at least one aspect. So I for one would hope that there won't be any more dark ages for you, because again, thanks to this interview, there's been so much that you've been able to essentially teach me just through your experience alone. So it's just really cool to have all this come together. So that is all of the questions I have for this interview episode today. Thank you so much, Jon, for joining me.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
This was a very interesting experience, both for the interview podcast and just to chat with you, because again, like I mentioned a moment ago, I feel like I've learned quite a lot just by talking with you.
Oh, good. If I can be an educator, that's another string to my bow.
Absolutely, and I'm pretty sure everyone out there who was listening to this episode will be educated on what Lego Trains was like back in the day as well. So thank you once again, John, for joining me. This has been the first episode of the LUKR member interviews. There will be more coming in the future, so stay tuned for them. Thank you once again for watching, and we will see you all in the next episode. Farewell, everyone.